The people of Scotland have spoken, and it is a clear result. They have kept our country of four nations together.
Scotland rejects independence, but is there a price to pay for keeping the United Kingdom united? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. It was a vote that threatened to break up a centuries-old union, with far-reaching consequences for Britain's standing in the wider world. But after a hard-fought and passionate campaign, Scotland has voted against independence from the United Kingdom. Opinion polls had suggested a contest too close to call, but in the end, it was a convincing result. The No campaign securing around 55% of the vote, while the pro-independence Yes camp polled a little under 45%. Turnout was just short of 85%, the highest ever for an election in Britain, reflecting the depth of feeling surrounding the issue. To our discussion in a moment. First, Julie MacDonald in Edinburgh reports on a referendum that keeps the United Kingdom together, but which is likely to change Great Britain for good.
During a long night at the end of a two-year campaign, Scotland watched as its future played out on live television. 194,000. As the votes were counted, the Yes campaign had a few highs, winning significantly in Scotland's second city, Glasgow, but there were more lows. More wins for the No's before the man who'd led the independence campaign accepted defeat.
It's important to say that our referendum was an agreed and consented process, and Scotland has, by majority, decided not at this stage to become an independent country. I accept that verdict of the people, and I call on all of Scotland to follow suit in accepting the democratic verdict of the people of Scotland.
The No campaign had been described as uninspiring, relentlessly negative. In the end, it played on Scotland's fears of the economic risks of independence, and it may well have won by doing so. On Thursday, voters turned out in their biggest numbers in Scottish electoral history, even if they didn't all get the result they'd hoped for.
Really disappointed because I just think now there's no chance of social equality, and you know, a fifth of our population live in the poverty, and it's just such a shame. It was a missed opportunity.
It's the right result. I think there's much benefit in being together and strength in the United Kingdom, and I think it's now time to bring Scotland together to respond to the result in a kind of very cohesive way.
I feel very disappointed. This morning, I've been most of night, watching the results, and I'm so sad for the people of Scotland.
The questions raised in Scotland's referendum are now being asked south of the border. Scotland's referendum has sparked a national conversation in the still United Kingdom. But more than that, it has inspired countless people around the world and reminded them that they too can peacefully demand change from their own politicians. But make no mistake, the flame of separatism in Scotland has not gone out. An enormous number did vote for independence. What they've been promised instead are more powers of self-determination by politicians hundreds of miles south.
Scotland voted for a stronger Scottish Parliament, backed by the strength and security of the United Kingdom. And I want to congratulate the No campaign for that, for showing people that our nations really are better together.
In London at Westminster, they will know now that a changed Scotland will hold them to account. Julie MacDonald, Al Jazeera, Edinburgh.
Well, let's bring in our guests for this Inside Story. In Edinburgh, we have Simon Peer, a journalist with the Scotsman newspaper, an advisor to two former Scottish Labour leaders who supported the No vote. And also in the Scottish capital is Kat Heathcote, who runs a publishing group that supported a yes vote on behalf of Scottish business. Welcome to you both. Well, David Cameron says the issue is now over for a generation. Let's begin with Simon Peer. Is it?
Yes, I think so. It was a decisive result, which I welcomed. Either way, if yes or no was going to win, if it had just been a couple of percentage points, that would have been highly unsatisfactory. But now the ball is in the court of Westminster. I think it was quite right that David Cameron came out early this morning to make a statement of intent. And last week, on the front page of a Scottish newspaper, the Daily Record, the three party leaders at Westminster pledged a vow to bring in more devolution for Scotland. Now, Cameron has reiterated that today, and he's also, I think, a wise move. He's also said there'll be more devolution in powers throughout the United Kingdom for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and that's to be welcomed, and we'll have to now wait and see.
Well, that's a point that we'll explore a bit further later. But first of all, Kat Heathcote, what does this mean to unity within Scotland itself? I mean, you have a situation, for example, where two cities vote in opposite direction, Glasgow and Edinburgh. What does it mean to Scottish unity?
I think at the moment we need to be careful not to overplay that. It was overall an election where 1.5 million people voted in favour of yes. And the demographic of that was very interesting. It was predominantly the under 55 and predominantly the over 55 voted no. Certainly we had a wonderful turnout of young people, of people who haven't previously felt enfranchised. So I think we need to be careful about setting up a division between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Both cities have similar problems, and indeed Aberdeen and Dundee, they're just on a different scale. What we need to do is ensure that the promises that have been made by the UK government to provide more job-creating powers, to help devolve the economies, not just in Scotland but in various parts of the UK, that they really come good on those powers. Otherwise, I fear we just find ourselves back in the same place again in a few years, and I don't think that's helpful. I feel very positive today with the comments that were made by David Cameron, and I absolutely agree with what Simon says. I think it's now time for them to work with us and to make sure that we keep those people that have felt enfranchised during this election and make sure that we come good for them.
Well, Simon Peer, the turnout was astounding, 85%, and it would appear that the message that has come out is that if you give people the opportunity to choose their political course, they are going to do so. Would you agree?
Yes, I think what is quite interesting is there was an active effort by the political parties, led off mainly by the nationalists, to register people. So the criticism you could make is that conventional mainstream politics, not just in Scotland or the UK, but throughout Europe and America, hasn't been seeking out the electorate enough. It hasn't been encouraging people to vote. This is what has happened in Scotland, and it was quite easy to entice them to register because we were discussing the future history of our country, and it would not affect just Scotland but also United Kingdom. So as Kat was said, I think the engagement is to be very welcomed. I am slightly more sceptical about how in-depth that engagement is, because I feel a lot of the discussion and debate in the campaign was really the reiteration of platitudes like the nationalists, the yes camp, were saying about freedom, self-determination. And I would contest with anybody that Britain is one of the freest countries in the world, and Scotland has not been oppressed. And it was ridiculous to speak about it in that manner when we look around at countries that don't have freedom. But of course you welcome the engagement, but people weren't specific, and I would make this as a criticism of the nationalists. They didn't lay out enough what sort of a Scotland it was going to be. And in a fundamental aspect on the economy, they didn't have the proper answers ready and waiting for the electorate as they went into the polling booth. And it was this uncertainty that backfired in them, because there is undoubtedly a great disillusion with Westminster, but you get that throughout Europe, disillusion with the political elites, and it's the same in America as well. But what Kat was saying, people will come together quite easily, because a lot of this vote wasn't so much a nationalist call for freedom from England as a protest vote against Westminster politics. And the Prime Minister says that's going to change, so we must wait and see what happens.
Well, Kat Heathcote, that is a very fundamental point, is it not? Looking at this whole process as containing that protest vote against Westminster-type government, the government that has been in place for centuries.
And I think it's very valid. I mean, the Westminster government model was set up centuries ago, and I think it's now looking increasingly anachronistic and inappropriate for our economy. The UK economy is quite different. For a relatively small country, you know, we have to contain London and its demands, which are very different from the rest of the UK. We have the old manufacturing economies of South Wales, where I come from. I'm not actually a Scot. Originally, I'm from South Wales. The northern economies, some of which have started to thrive again, but have found it difficult. And then obviously Scotland, which has a massive mixture, a very unusual mixture of finance, high technology, and still in some places the old manufacturing economies. And obviously oil services is another big part for us. So the old model, I'm not sure it particularly works well. I think it probably hasn't worked well for quite some time. I think the great promise that this vote has made has really proved to people that it has to change and that it really doesn't work anymore. And I think that any government, whether they be Conservative or Labour, will ignore that at their peril. I think we don't want to go through these processes again and again and again. We actually would be better off now if people really sat down and thought carefully about what we really need, what sort of federated structure, if you like, we could actually create that would meet the needs of each region, and instead of small spending councils, which is what we tend to have at the moment within cities, we actually give real economic power to each region to actually allow it to focus on its strengths, its weaknesses, and what it really needs.
Well, let's just pause here and take a look at what British Prime Minister David Cameron said. He said he will live up to the promises he made to Scotland in the run-up to the referendum. Promises or compromises, some analysts have suggested, that spared him from a humiliating defeat. They include more power over spending and setting income tax. Then there's welfare payments, such as housing benefits. But it appears unlikely that Scotland's Parliament will get control over oil revenues or corporate tax. The promise of greater autonomy has angered some British MPs, prompting calls for a separate English Parliament to deal with matters relating specifically to England. Simon Peer, the whole issue of devolution and the extent of it is now popping out of the box like a genie, and it's not going to be put back in. You hinted at this early on. What do you believe?
Yes, I think the genie is out the bottle. There's no going back. What is quite interesting, Mike, is before the question was set, poll after poll showed that about 70% of Scots wanted what we call Devo Max. So it wasn't actually separation from England, it was just a lot more control. Now, a criticism of the Scottish Parliament, and something that Scots will have to live up to, and the hard-edged reality is now the Parliament will have to be responsible for raising the income. Now, to date, it has been purely accountable for spending it. So the Scottish politicians are going to face difficult and unpopular decisions. Do they raise tax? And if Scotland wants to maintain the level of public spending it has at the moment, the solution seems to be a higher rate of income tax. Now, this is a subject that Alex Salmond avoided like the plague during the election campaign, and politicians throughout Britain, Europe and America are frightened to confront this issue. How do you support your public spending? Are you prepared to raise tax? So that is a ball batted back into Holyrood's court. And I think that is a sign of a maturing process for Scottish politics, because it's always been too easy for the nationalists to blame Westminster. So if spending powers and raising revenue is transferred to the Scottish Parliament, it will make us grow up a bit.
Well, joining us from London now is Jan Randolph, who's the Director of Sovereign Risk Analysis at AHS Global Insight. Welcome to you. The point of discussion that we're reaching here is the issue of devolution, the issue of the entire Westminster system now being called into question. What strengths, what powers do all the component parts of the United Kingdom now have? Does David Cameron have to look at this?
Yeah, I think this referendum has opened up the constitutional question of the whole United Kingdom. And also devolution, not just for Scotland, but for the rest of the UK. And Cameron's hinted at that tension, the tension of giving more to Scotland. What about the rest? Don't we all want maximum devolution? So, yes, it's reopened this constitutional question. It's about time, really, because if we look hard at the Westminster system, it is a relic, an inherited relic. It was used to manage a big empire, the largest the world had ever seen in terms of surface area, and now that's shrunk to a husk of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. And it's not suited anymore. And people in the regions want to take more control and have more accountability over their politicians and over finances. And in a way, Scotland's leading the way here. It's showing the rest of the UK a different kind of system, a system more bottom-up rather than top-down. And that includes not just the politics, but the civil service, and so on.
Well, Kat Heathcote, the possibilities now of a constitutional convention, Scotland having led the way, as we've just heard there from Jan Randolph, the issue now of looking at England, looking in Wales, looking at Northern Ireland, is there going to be a demand for the people to start defining what they want, and for the people to start looking at a constitutional system that many have argued has not worked for centuries?
And I don't think we should be frightened of that. I think what the last 2 years has shown is that if you take the time to properly explain to people some of the issues, you will get a vote, you will get a discussion that doesn't lead to violence, doesn't lead to all the things that were predicted. It was very peaceful. At the end of the day, 1.5 million people didn't get their way and they all went home to bed, and that's great. That's treating people in a grown-up way. The only thing I would say is that if you are looking at things like Devo Max, you do have to look at a little more than income tax. I believe that you need to start looking at items such as corporate tax, and that's going to be difficult because you could have one region of the UK incentivising corporations over another. That leads to a bit of internal competition, not necessarily something that's bad, but something that would need to be managed. Certainly a healthier way of managing restructuring of economies than the sort of subsidisation we used to do, where companies would be paid to come in and then the minute the subsidy's finished, as we've seen in Scotland, leave again, leaving a trail of redundancies in their wake. So I would prefer to see some way of businesses, be they large or small, be able to be incentivised to actually set up into a region, set up into a particular area, particularly where there's a great need that the various governments devolved are actually able to and allowed to determine some types of change in corporation tax or flexibility of taxation arrangements such that we actually achieve these things through bringing people into the work system as opposed to subsidising them.
And Randolph, we're looking at a situation, should we follow this type of model of a degree of local governance, greater degree of local governance, but at the same time, an interrelationship between those governments that is like nothing that we have seen to this particular point. As we heard Kat there arguing about corporations, for example, there would need to be an interchange between local governments at a level that one has not seen to date at all.
Yeah, I think the best example model we could look at, and it may surprise people, is actually Germany. They had to start from scratch at the end of the Second World War, and they started with a region-based political system, respecting regional histories, regional cultures, and taxes and spending was based around the economic activity of each region. Now, when we moved to the higher federal level, the Berlin, if you like, then what they did was they looked at per capita incomes, and the richer regions basically contributed into a central federal pot to help support the centre, but also to help support the poorer regions. That's how the regions work at the federal level, the nation-state level, and they have a separate chamber for that, and we could adopt that instead of the House of Lords. So there are examples out there which I think are healthier for democracies where there isn't the political alienation with the centre, and I think we need to revisit the entire architecture of our political system, starting with this bottom-up approach, re-engaging people with their immediate politics of the region, and making politicians responsible and accountable for financing at that regional level. Often we have the politics following the kind of financing we have in a country. The politics will tend to follow, and if we've got an overly centred political system, then the financing will follow as well.
Well, Simon Pierre, your view of this, I saw you nodding in agreement at one point there. Does there need to be a complete reworking of the system?
Well, I think the German model was a good model to refer to, because Britain is quite unique. It's the most centralised state in Europe. And on top of that, London is a global capital. It's one of the most powerful, dynamic financial centres in the world. And we are a small island. So it's almost quite natural that so much should be soaked into the centre. It's like a lodestar, so to speak. Now, the Westminster system is not operated efficiently in redistributing that throughout the rest of the UK. And I was against the separatism, the artificial border between England and Scotland, because I think areas like the northeast and northwest of England have lagged behind and would be in greater need of support from central government than, say, Scotland would, for example. I also am a supporter of the model of city regions and devolving power. As much in Glasgow, we've had the long-standing problem of a city that has suffered multiple deprivation, and they have statistics that would shame any city in Europe. And I think the way to solve that is devolving power to the people of Glasgow a lot more, so the city fathers and mothers, so to speak, are a lot more accountable to their city itself and for solving the problems that they have.
Kat Heathcote, not to go off target here, but I don't think that it would be right not to mention this very briefly. There was another voting process that happened in Scotland at the Royal and Ancient Club, which decided after centuries to open membership to women. A lot of change in Scotland in the past 24 hours, it would appear.
To be honest, I think that's a bigger change than the referendum was. It wasn't something I ever expected to see in my lifetime.
Your view
yes, I mean, the world is changing, clearly.
Your view on that, Simon Pierre, it is part of something wider, isn't it, of shifting societies?
Yeah, I think so, but also indicates that Scotland is not quite the egalitarian liberal left country that was part of the pitch by the nationalists. Scotland has got strong conservative elements, and it'll be interesting to see that they flex their muscles a bit more in a more devolved Scotland. But yeah, it was an anachronism, and it was not before time. But there is a strong Scottish elite and establishment that belongs in another age, and I think if we had separated, these reactionary forces might have had more clout. But I would say being part of a more progressive United Kingdom is beneficial in the long run.
Well, so many issues that have arisen out of this referendum, issues that go far beyond the immediate decision, it would appear. At that particular point, my thanks to our guests, Simon Pierre and Kat Heathcote in Edinburgh, and Jan Randolph in London.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Also, do let us know your thoughts. You can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on Twitter. Look for @AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.